Welcome back, guys. I just completed my third CQB class, and through all the weekly trainings we do, if you guys have been following us, you know that we practice on a weekly basis at Battlefield CQB here in Michigan. There's a few observations I've made, and it's generally around some fundamental skill sets and some basic capabilities that people don't have a good understanding of when they go into their first CQB class. Again, if you guys have been following for a while, you know I'm a huge proponent of civilians learning this skill set, but there's some pre-work, if you will, that should be done prior to going into a class. Things that are going to help set you up for success so you have a consistent base to build off of and don't have nearly as many individual struggles, while also trying to learn how to assess a threshold and clear a room, let alone attack things like hallways and intersections. So this video is going to break down some fundamental skills that are going to help you when you sign up for your first CQB class. If you're watching this right now and you're already signed up, don't go cancel, don't change any of your plans. Just hopefully use this as a guide to prepare you for what is to come in that course. So let's start with how you can practice on your own before you head to a class. You guys can see here I have a pair of mobile thresholds and a dog. This is going to help you prepare by setting yourself up with an actual ability to practice at home without needing to get into a shoot house or mess up one of your wife's favorite doors or something like that. This is super cheap and super easy to make. These are 36-inch driveway marker poles. They're reflective. I picked these up at Home Depot. I think maybe $5 for the pair of them. And then you'll see this is just a 1x8 and 2x4. Put a couple screws in the bottom there to make your base and a hole in the top to insert your driveway marker here. Now, what I did with mine, you don't have to do this with yours, but what I did to make it a little bit more easy and consistent on myself is I actually measured and cut these so that from not the length of the 2x4, but from the actual base of the 1x8 up to the top of this 2x4 is 36 inches. The reason for that is that most residential doorways are 36 inches wide. So what we can do is we can set up our first base here, and then we can take our second base. We can lay it down, kind of sister it up, right? Make sure that that's correct. And then we go ahead and we stand this up, make it a little bit of movement. And now we have our 36-inch doorway. And now we take our driveway marker, insert that, and now we have our threshold, which we can practice on. Before we go ahead and get into how to work with this, let's talk a little bit about the rifle, okay? So clear and safe, just so everybody is aware. Basic understanding of how to manipulate this weapon system ahead of your class. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they jump from not being able to proficiently operate this. I'm not saying you need to fire, and shoot and perform at a master level with this particular apparatus, but you do need some fundamental understandings of how this platform works. A couple big ones we'll talk about is your safety selector, okay? One of the things that gets talked about a lot, and this is, I've taken training from basically one company, but this is a pretty universal principle that gets discussed in a lot of training videos as well as at a lot of different companies. And that's some of our positions that we talk about with the weapons platform. So first, we're going to talk about our scanning position. Shoulder pocket with the stock, right? And we are looking not through our optics, not through the scope, not through the RMR. We're looking over the top of it. We are scanning. So if we find work, we are able to bring the optic up to our eye, flip off that safety selector, and then break that trigger. So whether you're doing this in a force on paper or a force on force class, you have that available to you as a ready to access skill set. It's not something you're going to be fumbling through in class. To work on this at home, very, very easy. You can put a piece of tape on the wall. You can get some dry fire targets. Those are available on Amazon and Ben Stoker's website and things. And you can use a shot timer, and when that beep goes off, you're just going to pick the gun up and safety off, pull the trigger. Okay, that's a big one as you start getting into force on force classes especially, but even force on paper courses where you're trying to understand the difference between shoot and no shoot targets or known and unknown threats. If you aren't able to do that, you're going to struggle. A couple other things that we can talk about here that they're not going to make a bunch of sense for what we're working on today, but are good for you to practice and work on for when you get into that course, whether it's a 2-man clearing class or a 4-man structure assessment class or even 5-man, is a couple of different positions. Now, we just talked about the scanning position. So gun in our shoulder, we're scanning over the top of our optic, not looking through it. When we talk about safely being able to stack up with our teammates or position ourselves in a manner that's going to be safe and effective, we talk about two positions. So from here in our scanning position, and you guys will find out about principles of work in your clearing process, there's two main positions that you should be familiar with, which is high port and low port, as we kind of define it for CQB. Low port in the flat range world can be something like this, and high can be something like this. When we're talking about CQB, something like this puts the barrel of your gun right at a convenient head height for somebody in front of you. So we need to be very deliberate when we talk about opening the gate or indicating non-verbally to our friends that we are no longer searching for work and we're ready to move on. We can use either of these two positions. So first would be our high position, which is not with the gun on a 45, but rather completely vertical, okay? And you notice it's not vertical across here. I'm not cutting into my field of vision, right? Completely vertical. And from here, I'm able to deploy straight back to that scanning position as I need to pick up more work. So you can literally just practice going from your scanning position to the high position and back, okay? Doesn't necessarily need to be super fast, but you do need to be ready to deploy that or be ready to repeat that process. Now, if you don't like that for whatever reason, maybe you were in the Army and you guys didn't bring your muzzles up for some reason, or you think that's unsafe, you can also go to the low position, which from our scanning position is literally just dropping the support hand and picking up the fire control hand so the gun is completely vertical, okay? It's not this, because that actually on some people is still at knee and pelvic girdle height. We want a very deliberate vertical presentation. So this says to all the people around me, hey, there's nothing else for me to do right now. I'm ready for the next thing. So it's either, one more time here, completely up or completely down. And being used to moving in and out of those pretty fluidly, it'll be helpful. What you guys get in your class may be something different. But if you have a basic understanding of those principal positions, it's going to help you. You're going to not be introduced to that concept for the very first time when you go into class. Okay, so now let's talk about the threshold, going through doorways. In essence, you're just walking through a door, but we like to find really complex and complicated ways to make this very difficult for ourselves. Now for this whole video, I'm running a 16-inch carbine, right? So a lot of people like to say you can't do CQB with a long gun because it's too big. Not the case. There's definitely ways you can do it and be very, very effective and very, very capable. I know there's a lot of agencies out there that run 16-inch guns because of how effective they can be for applications outside of a building. So when we're talking about the threshold, I have this set up. This is a drill that I'll talk about that I learned from Jason Ransom. He works for the Ryan Training Group and runs Ransom Tactical Solutions. It's called a figure 8 drill, and it basically just gives you the opportunity to work on sliding through a doorway. And not that you're always going to slide through, but it tends to be the thing that people get the most hung up on with the footwork. And there's some pretty good videos out there from places like Orion and some other companies. This is just my abbreviated version of it. Whatever side the wall is on, you're going to take that leg. So wall's on my right leg. That foot is what's forward. We're going to position ourselves along this wall to our imaginary threshold and bring the gun up. Now you can see here, my muzzle is past my driveway markers. So in real life, this would be exposed past the threshold and people in the room would be able to see what I'm doing. So here, this is why this is important to work on this, is working on either breaking the gun down over your shoulder. Some people like it under the shoulder. I'm not a big fan of that. Or additionally, if you don't like breaking the gun down, we'll get to that in a second. So here, I'm going to break the gun down. And now I need to make my step through. So from here, we're going to step with our left foot into the center of the threshold. And as we come forward with our right foot, we're going to step through. So now we're straddling this threshold. As we're breaking the threshold, we need to be working on getting that gun out of the compressed position and into our corner that we're going to dominate. Okay. And then we step through with the left foot. Okay. So in context, keeping in mind, we're training on our own, so personal accountability. You could set a camera up on your phone or on a stand or something like we have here to see this threshold and make sure that we're being personally accountable for not exposing our barrel. It's the number one thing that beginners miss, and I make that mistake all the time. So we're going to set up. I'm going to break down ever so slightly over my shoulder, step forward, and as I move through, punch the gun out and take a step, okay? Why Jason calls this the figure 8 is you can go ahead and step through and then come back. Because this is not a wall, it's actually basically just some cones. I can come to the other side. Now I switch it where my left foot is forward, right? I'm still gonna break the gun over my shoulder, step forward with my right foot. So I'm just about halfway through that threshold, cut through, push the gun out, and step, okay? And so you can do that in a figure 8 motion for as long as you need. Now, let's talk a little bit about setting up your gun and how it's going to play into what we just talked about. All right, so when we talk about setting up the gun, we're not going to talk about optics, we're not going to talk about lasers, we're not going to talk about barrel length, because it doesn't matter if you have good principled foundation of skills that you've built upon. What I am going to talk about here is your sling, okay? Sling, and actually we're going to get a little bit into the foregrip, and I'll tell you why in a moment here. With the sling, you can run it at the front and rear of the receiver, like I have here. I really like this because it does give you some versatility of a single point sling. I know some guys will take this, they'll keep it at the front of the receiver, they'll mount with a QD or something at the back of the stock, or maybe they'll go old school. They just run it, they weave it through the stock. Some guys like to go, I believe it's called longbow, where you go at the very end of your handguard and at the end of your stock. I find that to be less beneficial in a CQB application, but to each their own. There's definitely ways to do it. Now, we can be effective with the gun at the front and rear of the receiver, over our shoulder and under our arm. What can be very helpful if you're struggling with manipulating this weapon platform is just swimming this left hand through, and now you're wearing this sling like a necklace. And now we can do all sorts of things with this gun and not have to worry about hanging up, getting caught on as much kit, things like that. Sling manipulation is really, really important when we're trying to talk about things like angles and how we're able to punch the gun out, bring the gun up, or additionally bring the gun down. So I don't love running mine as a necklace, but I do it on occasion as needed. Do whatever works for you. Now, let's talk a little bit about the vertical foregrip, and more importantly, where we're positioning it. Now, those of you guys that have been around for a while, you remember back in the day, Chris Costa, Travis Haley, everybody was teaching this shit, right? So you shoulder the gun, and we're gonna take this hand and we're gonna put it as far out as we can, because then we get, I don't know, maximum leverage or some shit to pull the gun into our shoulder. What happens when we do that from the side here is, instead of having my shoulders square, right? So we're going through this threshold perpendicular, right? The threshold to my shoulders, right? Sorry, like that, is we're actually blading out. And what I mean by blading is we're having to turn our shoulder forward slightly, right, to bring this support hand out, which actually means that if this is my threshold, I'm not coming at it perpendicularly when I pass through. I'm actually coming at it on an angle, which makes my overall figure wider, okay? So when I back up to try and take this threshold, I'm turned out and I go to step through, even though I'm bringing my gun over my arm or my shoulder, I'm still hitting, you can hear it, right? Still hitting a threshold trying to get around. So if you need to run your gun that way, there's something we can do that we'll talk about, but what I would generally recommend, bring that vertical foregrip back so that when you are mounting the gun, you can bring your arm up in that support position without having to turn your shoulder forward. You want to present your plates, your armor, towards your potential threat. And that's a really, really good habit to get in when you're taking these doorways. So a combination of how you set up your sling and how you set up your foregrip. If you run one, if not, maybe just get used to pulling your hand back. Maybe it's just your light and laser controls that we need to make an adjustment to. But an important consideration, if you're somebody who's having trouble getting through this doorway because of how stretched out you are, you're turning your body in, but not your gun. And then you're hitting stuff when you come through. And again, notice this is just the rifle. Doesn't account for kit, back panels, backpacks, holsters, magazines, carabiners, anything else, all right? So as long as we keep our shoulders square to the threshold, break the gun down, we can step through without hitting anything. Yes, the barrel does need to come slightly down. What is okay with this is that even with it slightly down, we are still at the pelvic girdle height. We can still stack rounds on a bad guy if we need to. So there's a couple things to think about when we're talking about setting up our rifle and being effective with it. Okay, so mentioned it before. Maybe you're somebody that doesn't want to break the gun down over your shoulder. I know there's a lot of people on the internet, or maybe if you're former military, you really don't subscribe to that method, and that's okay. Different strokes for different folks, different reasons, pros and cons to everything that we do. So if you're one of those people that you think that breaking the gun down out of your shoulder makes you less effective, or you don't want to do it, you can still apply these skills in a way that's going to make you effective and capable. So starting back here by the threshold, like we did before, right? Instead of breaking the gun down, what we can do, keep that gun in our shoulder pocket. We're going to have to back off the door just a little bit, so we make sure that we're not presenting past our threshold marker here. And what we're going to do, instead of taking that step forward, we're actually going to take that step forward and out, so we're presenting at a 45-degree angle through this threshold, okay? So then the same process applies. So 45-degree angle, I'm still not presenting past the threshold here, but then as I step through, I can start orienting around the threshold, and I can start pressing back up, and the gun never left my shoulder. So in context, it's going to look something a little bit like this, and it just depends on what your personal preference is. So we're in our scanning position. I'm going to step out, step through, and it actually can be quicker if you're good at it. In some instances, with all things, it just depends on what you want, your context, what you feel more comfortable with, or it may just be your team SOPs. Okay, so let's also talk about, while we're using our practice threshold here, we've talked about sliding through or stepping through. That may not always be what you do when you approach a threshold, and in some instances, you really shouldn't. So what we're going to talk about is how to button hook. And if you can button hook, then you can do a center check, and we'll talk about both of those things briefly here. There's some really, really good videos out there that explain these in depth. This is just to give you guys some context on how to dry practice this at home so that you can get a little bit better either before your CQB class or give you some practice ideas after you take your very first CQB course. So line up on our threshold here just as before, right leg, wall on the right side, okay? So if I have to come around this threshold, that's called a button hook. So again, as to not expose my barrel, right, I'm going to step out and around in an arched path, okay? And as I get to this point, I'm rotating on this threshold as my axis, not the center of the door, but this threshold, so I can see more of them than they can see of me, okay? So I'm going to step out and around. Maybe you break the gun down, maybe you don't, depends on the size of the hallway. And then you're going to step through, present, and step through and do your scan, okay? Button hooking is going to be slower. So depending on the individual team SOPs that you work with, whether it's you and your buddies, could be your SOP for that class, could be an agency SOP if you're in law enforcement. Understand if it's going to be a little bit slower, maybe you button hook first, and then you have the second man that's going to be in class with you, right? They're going to slide in behind you, so you get two guns in the room pretty quickly rather than slide a guy in and then button hook where you have that 1 or 2 second delay that could be really, really bad. But that's kind of outside the scope for this. So we're talking about button hooking. You can do it the same way we're talking about the figure 8 drill. Jason Ransom, again, is line it up over here, right? We're going to walk away and out, and then we're going to come through. Cool. Now I'm back over on this side of it, and I can come right back. This time, left foot forward, right? We're going to rotate out and around, and then step through. And there you go, see? Now you can hear the base wobble because I was too wide on that, and you guys would feel that with your elbow and your equipment as you hit the threshold. So, good practice, good ideas. There's basically 2 ways to come through a threshold, and that's either to slide through or button hook. We can briefly talk about a center check, which is kind of a combination of the two. Sometimes you hear it called a half pan. If you guys want to work on this as well, you'll probably get a lot of really, really good instruction in your course, but just so you know what the term means, you're going to, as we talked about before, we're going to step out and out. We get to basically the center of the threshold, and then we're going to commit entry and break that threshold. Now, you could go either direction, but it would usually make more sense to go to what you haven't seen, which would be behind me in this case. So if you're working on a button hook, you'll be fine with a center check. So just a little context there. We don't really need to go super in depth on it. And you guys will get all of that in the class that you're taking. I think, again, you guys, everybody should take a CQB class at least once, see if you enjoy it. Some people take many. Like I said, I've taken 3 now. It's a great skill to have. We all live in houses and structures. There's absolutely no reason why, as a prepared citizen, you shouldn't have access to this information. Working on drills like this with some apparatus like this costs you guys next to no money, and it can absolutely make you a better, more effective, and capable individual. And it will give you 100% a better experience going into your first CQB class, because you're going to be overwhelmed with information and overwhelmed with knowledge, having stepped into a shoot house for the first time, having experienced all of this for the very, very first time. So hopefully this helps you guys. If you have questions, drop them in the comments. If you want to know more about how to build this or how to work with it, you can even build one. If you have something like the steel support beam in your basement, you can work with that. And if you're looking for an extra challenge, bring your dogs with you, step over things. Everyone knows that homes are seldom perfectly clean like shoot houses are. So again, I hope this is helpful for you guys. If you have questions, put them in the comments, and I hope you guys all go enjoy your very first CQB course. And if it's not your first one, maybe this helps you guys getting worked up for your next class.